Hello and welcome again to a retro wrestling review hosted by Eric Carrot that's me. And today we're going to go on a nostalgia trip. We are going to go all the way back to the year 1991, August the 26th, 1991 to be exact, for the pay-per-view of the summer. This was the fifth annual, no, I'm wrong, the fourth annual Summerslam 1991. It was held at the Madison Square Garden, once again, as I mentioned before, August 26th, 1991. And I remember it clearly as an adolescent when I saw this wrestling event, partially because the main event was not an actual wrestling match, but it was what was called a match made in heaven. In fact, the subtitle of SummerSlam 1991 was a match made in heaven, in which we would feature a kayfabe wedding between Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, and the match made in hell, which was a 3-on-2 handicap match between World Wrestling Federation champion Hulk Hogan teaming up with the Ultimate Warrior to take on the team of Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel Mustafa, and General Adnan, the Iraqi sympathizers. Of course, this was about during the time when, the United States was at war with Iraq. They were under the Herbert Walker Bush administration, and of course, George Bush was, of course, a top mogul in the oil industry. The United States was running out of oil, so what did they do? They went out to start a war in Iraq, tried to take down Saddam Hussein's regime. Unfortunately, they were not very successful, but they somehow negotiated in getting what their real intentions were. And that was not necessarily, like fighting in a war. That was kind of basically a distraction, but it was just to make negotiation with Muslims in that country because it was a heavy oil, because they're very much heavy on the oil industry, and United States just wanted to inject some oil in that country, in their country. But enough of the politics. But that's basically what the war in Iraq was. It was pretty much winding down by the time you get to the summer of 1991. And of course, wrestling loved to, use propaganda to promote this war as a big marketing conglomerate. So they decided to, to milk in this whole Hogan Slaughter, good guy America, bad guy Iraq type of thing going. Pretty xenophobic, but that was the wrestling atmosphere in the 90s as well as the 80s when things like that were happening. These days, you don't necessarily use war as a way. You don't use like war as propaganda in wrestling anymore. At least I don't think. They shouldn't, but somehow they thought they had something going when they did that. Anyhow, as an adolescent, I enjoyed the early years of SummerSlam as the summer spectacular event of the summer. And in 1991, I can say it had its share of moments. Some were good, others were just bad. But for the nostalgic guys like me, reminiscing of the early 1990s pay-per-views, this one was strong in terms of the structures, as well as it put in stories that did have some closures that were definitely a long time coming. Though not as strong as WrestleMania 7, but it was a good solid pay-per-view that we can all look back on and feel like we've just re-entered the 1990s. It was definitely a different period than compared to today, but then again, you could say every year is a new year. when you flip the calendar. And it actually sometimes even shows that in this pay-per-view itself. Joining the colleague broadcast team, we had the unbiased play-by-play guy, Gorilla Monsoon. We had the pro heel color commentator of Bobby the Brain Heenan. We also had the pro babyface color commentator of Roddy Piper. I don't know, for some strange reason, I never really got invested in Roddy Piper's character. I mean, I think the guy was practically overrated. I mean, basically, the guy was just some loudmouth talker who could just get on people's skin. And maybe that was just his role. I mean, maybe he never really had to fully alter himself, even when he turned babyface. He didn't really have to make a complete 360. But still, the guy actually, I don't know, let's face it, the guy was more better as a wrestler or the host of his own show, Piper's Pit. Just actually listening to him for long periods of time can sometimes get on my nerves. But maybe that's just me. Anyhow, we start the opening match with a 6-man tag, which features the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith, the Texas Tornado Kerry Von Erich, and the Dragon. No, not Ricky Steamboat, but just the Dragon. We all know that it was Ricky Steamboat. And I gotta admit, I actually did like his cool entrance. Okay, I didn't like that stupid, half dragon hoodie that he used to come in with. I didn't like that. But I did like the whole fire breathing through some kind of a pole type of trick. That was actually pretty awesome. But other than that, I don't know. I don't know. I never really dug this whole dragon thing. He was better off as Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, the WWF's version of the Karate Kid. A guy who has perfected in many martial arts disciplines. I've always found him to be, sadly, maybe one of the most underrated wrestlers in wrestling. Because, he is actually practically a small man in a big world. So he was often very, very sadly overlooked, especially in the WWF. In NWA, WCW, he was clearly pretty much more at home there than he was. The opponents that they were up against was all three members who were a member of Slick's group. I'm talking about Power and Glory, which consists of Paul Roma and Hercules, and the Warlord. Like I said, there's a lot of firsts and lasts here. Okay, when I look at these names, by the time you get to the flip of the calendar, I mean, we're talking about, this is SummerSlam 91 I'm reviewing. By the time you get to 1992, I would say about 90% of the people in this match did not come in to 1992 as active WWF wrestlers. Nope. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat would shortly be gone some months later because of the fact that, he didn't want to end up becoming a jobber bitch to The Undertaker. That's what they actually had planned. But he didn't want that, so he said, "Fuck you, Vince," and walked off. Eventually, he was welcomed back to WCW with open arms, so good for him on that. The Texas Tornado, well, I don't think he actually, as an active wrestler, stood around for very long because, he was going through some issues, that's putting it bluntly, but, he had, of course, multiple arrests. He also has had some family issues that had been kind of unsettling for him. Apparently, his life pretty much got twisted up and down. He started suffering from depression, which inevitably led to his suicide in February of 1993. Sad story, yes, definitely for sure. Even also the villain teams of Hercules, Paul Roma, and the Warlord, by the time you get to 1992, they're already gone. I mean, Power and Glory kind of pretty much lost its steam after they got annihilated by the Legion of Doom at WrestleMania 7 in just like less than a minute. It would be like you would go to the, before the match begins, you would have the Legion of Doom making their pay-per-view debut in the WWF at WrestleMania 7 against Power and Glory. You would probably go into the kitchen, prepare yourself, a bowl of popcorn or soda, and then when you come back, the match is over. Yep, that pretty much this pretty much put an end to just the integrity of Power and Glory. I mean, before then they looked pretty strong, especially against teams like the Rockers and other babyface teams like the Hart Foundation or the New Foundation. They looked pretty strong. They looked like they were going to be a solid team. But unfortunately, their steam just pretty much dried up. The Warlord, he stuck around a bit. He was a member, of course, the Powers of Pain. But he was always going to be best remembered for having one of the shortest Royal Rumble stays by being eliminated just 3 seconds. And he would be the laughing stock of the WWE for many years to come until Santino Marella actually broke the record for being eliminated in less than 2 seconds. But still, by the time you get to, he stuck around maybe a little bit longer, but then by the time you get to 1992, even he was gone. So I guess in the end, the only one who stuck around a lot longer was the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. SummerSlam 91, he was pretty much the opening act for SummerSlam. By the time you get to next year, he's practically main eventing the show. So what did I think about this match? So this was a solid opener with the heel team outpowering the Dragon in every way. Pretty obvious because of the fact that he's a little bit smaller than most of the other guys in this match. But Steamboat, for a little guy, is tough. And though he takes most of the bumps, it was he who relatively overcomes it all with the final decision as he applies the flying body press on Paul Roma for the win. It was also smart booking for the faces to win due to the Bulldog being more geared towards something more spectacular following year. Yeah, next year he would be, the following year I should say, not next year, the following year he would, go on to main event SummerSlam. But for now, he's just the opening act. It's sad that 3 of these 6 stars in this match are also not with us anymore. They sadly passed away. We lost Hercules in 2004. We lost the Texas Tornado in 1993. We lost a British Bulldog in 2002. So they're not with us anymore. And, that's kind of a sad thing. When I look at these rosters, these wrestlers from 1991, it's like, oh my God, it feels like I've really either catched on in age myself, because these are the people I grew up with as a kid and as an adolescent, and now they're just no longer with us. I get that feeling in practically almost every match I see when I'm doing these nostalgic reviews. They're either all shells of their former selves, or they're all dead. It just pains me to see so many of our stars go, and a lot of them pretty much left this earth. I would say roughly between 2002 to 2009, we have lost a lot of legends in this business, and it just so saddens me that these people who once ruled the gamuts in the field of wrestling are just not with us anymore. So it does bring a bit of a tear to my eye to some extent, but because these matches were fun and exciting and great to watch, sometimes I think about just that and not think about, morbid details. Otherwise, I would just be crying. The next match we had was probably maybe the best match on the card, and maybe probably one of the best matches in SummerSlam history. We get the Intercontinental Championship match between Mr. Perfect versus Bret the Hitman Hart. I never quite understood the whole connections that Mr. Perfect had with Coach. I can of course understand the connections that he would have with the genius Lanny Poffo, being the self-proclaimed world's smartest man and a man who never makes mistakes. I mean, they could have even be formed a team called the Perfect Connection. But, still nonetheless, Mr. Perfect is a legend in this sport. And it's just a shame that he never got to the point where they could have made him a world heavyweight champion. But seeing him as an intercontinental champion, well, that kind of puts him in the category of a mid-card MVP, even though I clearly think he should have been a main eventer. And I think he probably would have gotten a big push if he would have stayed in the company a bit longer. The reason for him jobbing to Bret the Hitman Hart was simple. If you ever watched any of Mr. Perfect's matches, you may know that the guy takes a lot of bumps. He really sells those bumps and thumps that he does in the ring. I mean, you could look like you could do an innocent clothesline, and he would turn it into a somersault backflip to kind of really sell the physical pain. I mean, he may not necessarily be like really hard hit, but he really does flip a lot. And I guess you could say it took its toll on him, because apparently after the match, Mr. Perfect, had to spend a substantially long period of time recovering from back surgery, much needed back surgery. How did he look in this match? He looked sometimes pretty much out of shape. He didn't have that same kind of level of energy. We could clearly tell that the guy looked like he was in physical pain, but the guy still fought on. So I'm going to give him a lot of credit. The guy was a trooper. You probably may have not liked him because of his cocky, conceited attitude. But I think, the guy was actually just doing his job right as a villain heel. But he was one of the more well-respected heels. And for him to actually put a title match on the line, instead of, just vacating the title and just, making somebody win a battle. No, he wanted to actually pass the torch to a person who he feels is right for this position. So he actually brought Bret the Hitman Hart on to actually fill in for him, to actually, pass the torch to. And they fought a great classic match. Perfect was not going to go down that easily. Bret Hart wanted to make sure that this match was going to be a good 50-50 thing, and it was. Bret the Hitman Hart showed just how an amazing ring technician he is. Mr. Perfect has always been an excellent ring technician. We saw these two technical wizards going at it, and if you like good, solid technical wrestling, I got to admit this match definitely was a classic. And I even think that this was a very important win for Bret the Hitman Hart, because this truly would push and solidify Bret the Hitman Hart as one of the top single stars in the WWF. Of course, in the 80s, he was member of the Hart Foundation as a tag team. Now he's breaking away as a tag team wrestler and is now being ready for his next step in his wrestling career, which is to become a top singles superstar. And I think he actually did show that during this match, that he is ready to break onto a stardom of his own. So you may think that there was some happiness to it, but of course the sad news is of course, after Mr. Perfect's surgery, he became much more dependent on painkillers, which in some ways could be both very helpful and it could also be both very harmful if not taken to precaution. Unfortunately, Mr. Perfect learned that kind of thing the hard way, which pretty much all costed his ever opportunity of ever main eventing a match, because to be a main eventer, you probably may have to go through some more grueling initiatives. So he kind of had to sort of spend most of his career, or pretty much the rest of his career, as a mid-card act, whether he was in WWF or WCW or TNA. Yes, he had a brief run in TNA. And of course, unfortunately, he sadly passed away in 2002 at the age of 44, becoming too dependent on painkillers. There was not only was this a great scientific technical match, too, there was some funny moments, including Bret Hart ripping off Mr. Perfect's singlet to the point where he actually had to walk out of the arena in black underwear. At least he actually had the common sense to wear underwear and not some fucking speedo that only just covers up your crotch and your sphincter. But if you want some good classic technical fights aside from that, Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect is truly a match to get invested in. We come next to the next match we have is the Natural Disasters, Earthquake, and Typhoon with Jimmy Mouth of the South Heart in their corner to take on the team of the Bushwhackers, Luke and Butch, or when they were the Sheepherders, they just went by their names, Luke Williams and Butch Miller. Anyhow, Andre the Giant was actually in the corner of the Bushwhackers. Of course, Andre was there because of the fact that he still had a legitimate beef with Earthquake. After all, Earthquake was the one who was responsible for busting Andre the Giant's leg. I guess you could say maybe this was kind of like Andre the Giant's way of sort of, passing the torch to Earthquake to be the WWF's #1 top giant in wrestling. Like in the 80s and 90s, you had Andre the Giant. By the time you get to the 90s, you had Earthquake. Let's see. By the time you get to the early 2000s, you have the Big Show. And now these days, the top giant in the WWF, I guess, would probably be Braun Strowman today. But in some ways, this whole pass the torch thing, also, there was also some teaser trailers that came during around this period of time that the WWF wanted to actually have Andre the Giant sort of make a return to the ring. And managers from around were trying to, get them to join him, including even Bobby the Brain Heenan himself, who wanted to put all the anger and all the differences aside between him and Andre to see if they can work out a deal so that he could get back to the Bobby Heenan family, increase his salary, give him title matches, anything. But unfortunately, Andre the Giant refused everyone's order. There was even a part where even Sherry herself wanted to manage Andre. But the only thing she got from Andre was a big spanking. I'm sure that probably turned Andre on, but obviously Andre has no interest in any kind of managerial stuff. But then he decided to sort of take the initiative. But since Andre had a legitimate beef with Earthquake, so he took it upon himself to arbitrarily accompany the Bushwhackers for their match against the newly formed Natural Disasters. There is a bit of a story to. I mean, prior to before he was repackaged as Typhoon, Fred Ottman, aka Typhoon, the Shockmaster, he actually had a pretty lame gimmick, as he was called Tugboat. Well, it just so happened that Tugboat eventually betrayed the Bushwhackers and joined forces with Earthquake to form the Natural Disasters. And man, oh man, they were kind of like the early 90s version of another team of huge giant men. I'm talking about the team of King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd, who were running amok in the 80s. Well, now that we are looking back at the early 90s, we could see the team of of Earthquake and Typhoon, the natural disasters. They just had this great natural chemistry for each other. That's because, both men were almost 400 pounds, while Earthquake was something like 470. But, these guys were freaking awesome. They had some good chemistry with each other. Of course, they had the fear factor because of their girth, because of their heaviness. I mean, two huge monstery type super heavyweights were dominating. And, the match itself wasn't really that good, but at least, it was good to see Andre the Giant one last time in a WWF ring. Did he ever did come back to wrestle, even though he really never should have. But it was not in a WWF ring. It was actually in a promotion in Japan. I don't know whether it was New Japan Pro Wrestling or All Japan Pro Wrestling. I don't remember. IWGP, I think it was. I'm not sure. Anyhow, yeah. Apparently, we could clearly tell that the guy came to the ring in crutches. We could clearly tell that he could barely walk these days during this period of time. We could tell that his growth had grown quite exproportionately, and also we could tell he was in poor health. But he still somehow did manage to take a few shots at Earthquake. Then all of a sudden, the Nasty Boys suddenly came out and started, like teaming up with the Natural Disasters to take down the Bushwhackers. Till finally, the Legion of Doom stepped up and kind of became like the save the day vigilantes. But nonetheless, this match had some entertaining value to it. Even though it wasn't really that great of a match, it was basically the post-match theatrics that really was what kind of saved them up. And, the Natural Disasters became one of the top teams in the WWF, especially during 1991-92, before they broke up in much later than that. Okay, the next match we had was for the $1 Million Championship. We had Ted DiBiase, who was accompanied by Sensational Sherry, and they took on Virgil, and this was for the $1 Million Championship. Now, I just want to remind you that the $1 Million Championship was not owned by the WWF. This was actually just Ted DiBiase's own personal possession. He, after his failed attempts at trying to buy the World Wrestling Federation champion, which did not go very well as planned, he came close, but not close enough. So he decided that if I can't buy the World Wrestling Federation champion, I may as well make myself my own personal one, made with gold, made with diamonds, with dollar signs on there. Yes, indeed. Ted DiBiase. Now, Ted DiBiase can just wear the belt on his own, and it doesn't have to be defended. It's his own personal belonging. But in SummerSlam 1991, he decided that he himself was going to put the $1 Million belt on the line against Virgil. Virgil, of course, as you all know, from 1987 to 1991, he was basically, Virgil was Ted DiBiase's personal servant, which, of course, kind of was a very cringeworthy angle, with the rich white guy and the submissive, subservient black guy. I know back then it was kind of racist to have this kind of angle, but at least, we got the chance to have Virgil actually shine. I mean, during his feud with Ted DiBiase, this was the time when Virgil got some of like the biggest pops in his career. And I'm not just saying that because, I'm talking about SummerSlam 91, but it's because with the DiBiase Virgil feud, this is where he was at his most popular. I mean, he was starting to become very popular, especially around the minority communities, they all loved to see, Virgil finally emancipating, no longer being subservient to the whims of the privileged white male, finally coming out and being strong and independent and empowered. And we got to see that in him. We saw a small example of that at WrestleMania 7, which was not a bad match, but nothing really that memorable. But then you come to the real highlight of the DiBiase Virgil feud, and Virgil just practically took it upon himself. He had a really good night. Aside from Bret the Hitman Hart and Mr. Perfect being the best match on the card, Virgil and Ted DiBiase was practically the second best. I'm actually surprised, that Virgil is quite a decent technical superstar. He can actually fight pretty good. He's got some good moves. He's got some speed in him. DiBiase, even though he's playing this evil, money flashing guy who likes to try to buy things off, and there's always seems to be a scheming, hatching, manipulative jerk. He also is a jerk that could back things up. He actually has some. He was a very underrated wrestler. He actually had some very good technical skills. He could fight a good technical match. He is an actual master in the ring. Of course, his $1 Million Dream has always been a great trademark maneuver. I have always thought of him as an in-ring competitor to be underrated. I mean, what overlooks his technical skills is the fact that the guy had tremendous amounts of charisma, and he was always kind of considered a larger-than-life individual who knew how to cut promos. He knew how to delve into heel heat like no others. He was a master on the microphone. As a character, he was this real evil villain who knew how to flash things around. But everybody always used to overlook his wrestling skills. He was a master ring technician who actually can fight good, solid matches. Maybe not 5-star, but he could move around the ring very well. I mean, technically he wasn't a big muscly type of guy. I mean, he wasn't a small man per se, but he wasn't this guy with a physique. He was more as a guy who knew how to play dirty, and he could do it like no other. Virgil, I'm actually quite surprised. He actually does have some decent technical skills. And this was, like I said, the second best match on the card. Virgil actually would come on to win by knocking out DiBiase with the $1 Million belt. Hey, who's supposed to be the babyface in this match? But somehow he still got the win, and he still got practically a big ovation by the fans. Maybe probably one of the biggest ones on the card. I kid you not. By the time you get to the point where the Virgil DiBiase feud was starting to fizzle, people just started to become not too much invested in him anymore. Once he started going around feuding with other people, it was like he just ended up becoming just a glorified jobber. And just became another face in the crowd. But for what all it's worth, this match was actually pretty solid. The next match that we have on the card was a jailhouse match between the Big Boss Man versus the Mountie with Jimmy Hart. Where in this match it just plays off as a regular one-fall match, but the stipulation is that the loser of this match must have to spend one night in jail. Now you would think, oh, one night. I'll spend one night in a cell. And then maybe by tomorrow I'll just come out, because I'm just following the rules of a stipulation. And who knows, maybe both these guys in their kayfabe will probably just get more of a spoiled treatment. But then again, hey, this is just one night, but still, you never know. Maybe people might think that one night in jail is practically the end of your life. No, it isn't. But still, the match was, of course, obvious that they would have a match like this since both the Big Boss Man and the Mountie are pretty much representative of the law. Of course, the Mountie is, Jacques Rougeau. Of course, they had to make the Mountie into a Canadian stereotype. Here he is, dressed in his Mountie uniform with the baggy black pants, the brown boots, and the uniform. Big Boss Man, of course, always comes dressed in his police officer type ghetto, even though the guy was actually a former prison guard, which actually means he was pretty much like a glorified babysitter to these prisoners. So he didn't really ever actually have to arrest. His job was practically just to shake his uh, a billy club around the cage rings and inject intimidation. But basically, the guy was just a glorified babysitter to these inmates. So he's not really actually arresting people. The Mountie, of course, likes to win a lot of his matches with the help of a cattle prod. Well, now it has just come to the boiling point where we have the good guy, all-American Big Boss Man, and of course the bad guy, Mountie, who likes to electrocute people with the help of a cattle prod. The match itself wasn't really that spectacular. Big Boss Man gets the win, so therefore, it was the right thing to do. So it was just kind of like apropos that they would just arrest Jacques Rougeau, put him to jail. There were several, like back and forth vignettes of him going to jail. The whole, like stick his finger into the fingerprints and things like that. Getting his mugshot taken. Being forced to spend a night with some hoodlum till he was finally like saying, "Get me out!" The match itself, like I said, wasn't that good. It was just the reactions and the aftermath of what happened. Of course, there was a lot of backstage interviews during around this period of time. Bret Hart saying that he's going to take on all comers. All the kayfabe stuff, celebrations, natural disasters. We're talking about, their next oncoming feud. Things like that. Whether it be from Sean Mooney or Lord Alfred Hayes or Mean Gene. There was also a segment where Bobby the Brain Heenan, who was carrying what was still officially owned by WCW, which would eventually become a thing for the WWF around the early 2000s when it was just dubbed the World Heavyweight Champion, but back then it was pretty much owned by Ted Turner. They had to scratch out the NWA or WCW logo. But Bobby the Brain Heenan was knocking on Hulk Hogan's door saying something along the lines like Ric Flair is coming after you to prove that he is the real world's champion and shit like that. Hogan slams the door in Heenan's face. So yeah, I saw a lot of backstage interviews. They're usually corny and gimmicky. And of course they're talking about what their next plan is. Next up we have is the tag team title match on the line in a street fight between the Nasty Boys versus the Legion of Doom. Hawk and Animal, whether they're the Legion of Doom or the Road Warriors, it's still just the same people. This was actually something that was a long time coming for Vince McMahon. I mean, Vince McMahon has always been pining of when will we ever see the Road Warriors / Legion of Doom come to the WWF. I mean, for many years he used many like Road Warrior type gimmicks going for him, like teams like Demolition and the Powers of Pain. They all kind of had that kind of thing with the face paint and the spikes, and the guys who just go in there looking scary and intimidating, and then coming out with easy wins, which is kind of like pretty much what the Road Warriors program was. And everybody was actually anticipating, like, will we ever see the Road Warriors actually win the WWF Champions? This match definitely was a long time coming for them. Um, the match itself wasn't really that great. Even though it was pretty brutal, there was some brawling from both teams. But in the end, everybody kind of knew that the Road Warriors were going to actually win the match. Because, hey, why not? If they do, they would actually mark a very historical moment, especially in tag team wrestling, as the Legion of Doom actually did go on to beat the Nasty Boys and had this great milestone as being the first tag team and maybe the only tag team in wrestling history to held championship matches, to held championship belts, I should say, in 3 different promotions: the AWA, the NWA, and the WWF. And as formulaic as it seems, this was an historical moment in the WWF because they finally got their Legion of Doom and they finally got them to be a part of the company and to make them, top stars, as they would hold on to the tag team championships for several months. Next match, I'm not going to go too much well into. This was between Greg the Hammer Valentine versus IRS. Nothing much to say about this one, except that Mike Rotondo was going by his brand new gimmick, the Taxman, and he would be wrestling dressed in a business suit with a tie and a flannel shirt and black dresser pants. I'm not going to say very much about this match. I thought it was kind of weird to see Greg Valentine playing off as a babyface. I mean, come on, this guy is clearly a heel, and he's meant to play a heel. He's a villain. And I think that maybe the WWF made a big Virgil made a big formal mistake of just making Valentine into a baby face. Kind of sad that he would be out of the company, but I guess you could say this was the beginning of a new gimmick, a new repackaging for Mike Rotondo, as he would take on the role of Irwin R. Shyster for actually quite some time, many years in the WWF, feuding as either a singles guy or a tag team with Money Incorporated. He was truly, and as an in-ring competitor, in spite of the fact of having a cheesy gimmick by being the tax man, as an in-ring competitor, he was actually a pretty decent technical kind of guy who fought some pretty good matches, nothing 5-star. The guy was a mid-carder. But I think his shining moments was when he was tag team champions with Ted DiBiase, when they were Money Inc. That was pretty much his highlight. I think I actually said too much about this, and even though I said I wasn't going to, but I did anyway. Anyhow, the match was a dud. And then finally we come to our last match on the card, which was a 3-on-2 handicap match between Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior versus Sergeant Slaughter, General Adnan, and Colonel Mustafa. And they brought in Sid Justice, who has spent a couple of years with WCW. He teamed up with Dan Spivey, and I believe a very young pre-Undertaker Mark Calloway to form the Skyscrapers. Well, they brought him into the WWF. And originally planned, I think, they were actually wanted this match to be a 6-man tag, but because of the fact that Sid Justice did not get along very well with the Ultimate Warriors, so he decided, no, I wasn't going. In fact, he wasn't really actually going to take part in it, but he was afraid that he was going to get fired if Vince McMahon if he did not agree on being a special guest referee. Personally, the match wasn't really that great. Definitely a lot of brawling. But I think the real highlight of this match was not actually the match itself. Yeah, okay, it was predictable because, we have to have the good guys win. But the highlight of this match actually was something that wasn't kayfabe, and that it actually really did took place, and there really was an outrage that took place backstage, especially the part where the Ultimate Warrior chased General Atnon outside of the arena to go backstage. But this was actually just the Ultimate Warrior's excuse to take a shot at Vince McMahon, who he, of course, was not very pleased with, by saying something like he needed is that he was asking for more money that was given to him during his match with Randy Savage at WrestleMania 7. He even went so far as to pin Vince McMahon to a wall and told him he wants his money. Vince McMahon gladly agreed. Vince McMahon showed him the money, and then he said to Ultimate Warrior said to Vince McMahon he wanted his money. Vince McMahon came up to him, gave him the money, and then he told him to not come back to the ring. He was actually fired on the spot, which is kind of a bit unusual in wrestling, especially in non-kayfabe situations, which is why that after Hogan's victory win over the Iraqi sympathizers, he did not share the spotlight or celebrate his muscle posingness. So instead, Sid Justice eventually took over, and he started to expose his mustache, his muscles. Well, he didn't have a mustache at the time. His muscles and his physique. And for the most part, they would remain good friends. And then, of course, as always, best friends can sometimes turn into worse enemies, as you know. That's how strange life goes. So then we come to the end of the card, which was a match made in heaven between Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. Now, of course, everybody knows in the wrestling business that Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth had been married since 1984 or 85. But I think what really mattered the most was, the fact that Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, as managers at the time, Miss Elizabeth was considered kind of like the sweet, lovable type, while Randy Savage was the victim, was like the bully, and would often, not necessarily throw his weight at them, but for a kayfabe wedding, So one of the things about this wedding was that the marriage, they had been married for each other for about 8 years, and then 1992 they would eventually divorce. So it just goes to show you how much of a difference a year makes. I mean, one year we're having a kayfabe wedding, the next year Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth divorced when she pretty much had enough of his overprotectivism towards her, by even going far as to locking her in a locker room so that she doesn't get humiliated, or he used to possess her quite a lot. So finally, after many years of them being basically just business partners, they finally decided that to have an in-ring wedding. Of course, we all know this is kayfabe, but nonetheless, it was a very sweet moment that really, really makes this pay-per-view almost spectacular. So they go with their vows and stuff like that. And then they eventually take themselves to the reception room where they would see a whole bunch of presents lined up. Miss Elizabeth wanted to open one present, When she opened it up, a baby cobra was there. And in the background, you can hear Jake the Snake laughing maniacally. Of course, this would often lead to, of course, Randy Savage eventually, who was supposed to have retired at WrestleMania 7, would eventually become reinstated. Yeah, that's right, he would eventually come back as an active wrestler and would begin a long-going feud with Jake the Snake Roberts. I mean, originally Jake the Snake Roberts was trying to work some programs with the Ultimate Warrior, but since the Ultimate Warrior was, he was fired, like right there on the spot, so Jake the Snake Roberts decided to work a program with Randy Savage, getting him back in the ring and causing heartbreak and fear towards him and Miss Elizabeth. So that's kind of like how it ends. Overall, I thought this was a really great SummerSlam. I really enjoyed this SummerSlam quite a lot. So if I was to give this pay-per-view a scale out of 10, I would probably definitely give this one an 8.5 out of 10. It's a very good SummerSlam, but of course, it's not going to be the 9 out of 10 because you would have to wait till the next SummerSlam where I will give my review about it. So I guess this ends my retro wrestling review. I hope you all liked it. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with some more movie reviews or wrestling reviews. Try to make things original and fresh. So until next time, this is Eric Red Rider saying, whatever it is you're watching, don't be afraid to evaluate. Thank you very much, and have a good day, you all. Goodbye.